The ACC, with 3 different parties suing it, is likely on its last leg. Does that mean a school like Miami needs to find a new home in a conference like the Big 12? This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cane crossover.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Canes crossover episode. I am Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. That is Alex Dono, the insider for all things Miami Hurricanes. Thank you for making our shows your first listen every single day. Today we'll cover Miami and the ACC. Will a move be made if the conference implodes, as well as Miami fans not being too happy about the idea of a Big 12 membership? And then at the very end, we'll see if we can convince you that a partnership wouldn't be that bad for both parties. Dono, to start, the Attorney General in Florida is now suing the ACC alongside Clemson and Florida State. Things do not look good for Commissioner Jim Phillips and company. What are the odds this league stays together, or is it as bleak as it's been?
I don't think it's quite as bleak as some people are making it out to be. And I say that as of extreme scenarios because Drake, and I know you've been covering conference realignment as closely as anyone because you're doing a great job covering it here on Locked On Big 12. I've been following it pretty closely. I've seen such a wide range of theories as to when the doomsday switch will be hit on the ACC. I've seen some pretty popular theories that say the ACC could implode as soon as June 30th of this year, which is less than 2 months away. Some people have more conservative predictions, like, within the next couple of years, the ACC is going to look vastly different. They're going to lose some prominent members. They're probably going to bring in some sort of filler teams that are not currently in a power conference to try and just fight for survival. And the TV deal is going to get diminished. One thing that I can agree on with everybody who has these theories, and I know that these lawsuits are in progress right now. Florida State is suing the ACC, getting countersued. Clemson is suing the ACC, getting countersued. You also mentioned Florida's Attorney General is jumping on board because she really wants those ESPN contracts to be made public record. They're currently under lock and key, and that could be a potentially very bad thing for the ACC. So one thing that I can definitely agree on is within the next 2 to 5 years, and maybe even sooner than that, Florida State and Clemson are going to be out, right? At some point, whether they successfully break the grant of rights is yet to be determined. But even if they don't all and out break it, I think at some point a settlement to allow those schools to leave is more than likely. Like there's no way Florida State and Clemson are going to be stuck in the ACC till 2036. It's just not going to happen. So then the question is, if and when Florida State and Clemson find a way out, does that cause the whole conference to crumble? A lot of people have theories that ESPN might sort of, nudge things in that direction to help the ACC blow up, or does the ACC continue to operate in some form? I take a little bit more of a conservative long view on it. I think if the ACC does implode, it's a matter of years, not weeks. Like, I don't think it's going to happen in the next 7-8 weeks. I think it's more likely to happen in the next 2 to 5 years. But with that said, Drake, every member school, whether you're currently suing the ACC or not, every member school is committing administrative malpractice if they're not keeping their eyes and ears open for contingency plans. Because if something does happen in the short term because if Florida State finds some smoking gun, if discovery is ordered by one of these judges and they find some smoking gun that invalidates the ACC's grant of rights, this whole thing could implode pretty quickly. Not that I'm expecting that to happen, but every university, Miami included, needs to have their eyes and ears open for possible contingency plans if this thing does go south very quickly.
Donna, one thing I find interesting is Clemson seems to be a leader in this conversation. And 15 years ago, their revenue numbers were worse than Bowling Green in football. No one cared about Clemson. What they did is they won in the college football playoff era. Therefore, their valuation is high. If we were talking expansion in 2003, Miami's at the top of the list in the ACC. They are helping run the show in that conference. In the last 2 decades, though Miami is still a powerful brand in college football, the revenue numbers are not there with where a Clemson has gone, where they have eclipsed Miami. Therefore, it seems like the 2 prominent properties, Florida State and Clemson, are in conversation with the Big Ten, the SEC. At least that's the general consensus. That's where they want to go. Is Miami in a position where they could be a part of the Power 2, or is the Big 12 the proper landing spot for the Canes?
Well, I think to that regard, because you bring up a great point, how quickly the whole thing can change, right? In terms of how quickly Clemson was able to turn their perception around. And obviously, some people may say 15 years is not that quick, but what have you done for me lately? And what have you done in college football lately goes a long way. And so if I can say in the short term, what Miami's doing actually with their football transactions and on the field and field adjacent, they're trying to put themselves in position to be a powerhouse type program, which you're right, they have not been for the better part of the last 20 years. I have no delusions about that. Okay. But you see how aggressive Miami has been in recruiting, consecutive top 10 classes, what they've been doing in the transfer portal, adding recently the top quarterback available, the top running back available, and Damian Martinez, Cam Ward, of course, being the quarterback, and the top receiver at the moment, Sam Brown, who was playing in Houston previously, was the top available guy in the transfer portal. It's a team that's trying to be aggressive to change their perception. So in that case, if you talk about maybe a less accelerated timeline of the ACC imploding, collapsing, if Miami can actually back up what they're doing with their recruiting and their portal and have a couple of good seasons on the field, maybe 2 years from now, 3 years from now, they're more attractive to the Power 2, right? But at this moment, I can understand because there are some things, and some of these are Miami's fault, that are working against Miami and being part of that conversation. It's a weird sports market down here where if you're not winning big and winning consistently, people are not going to invest their time and money going to your games, right?
Yeah.
We've seen that. When people talk about empty seats, Miami's not a college town. Miami's a private university, very small alumni base. So if you're expecting, 70,000 people or 68, I think is the capacity, 68,000 people to show up at Hard Rock Stadium, they're not doing that when you're 7-5. They're doing that 9-0, 10-0 is when you pack a building like that. So that's also something that in the short term, when they're not doing well, makes Miami look a little bit less attractive. But people in this area, they like to support winners, right? Inter Miami, the MLS team, they grab Leo Messi. It becomes the hottest ticket in the country, right? When the Miami Heat were winning championships, LeBron was in town. You were paying, $1,000 for seats to Miami Heat games. That's just the way it goes down here. So that's another thing. If Miami can produce the results on the field, it can make them more of an attractive brand. I mean, the U always means something. It still means something around college football, but the rest of it just hasn't been there. They're trying to get back to that.
Dono, I want to be clear, and I'll put words in Miami's fans' mouths. They aren't excited by Miami and the Big 12 being in the same sentence. At least that's not the perception the Big 12 gets. Let's go there next on Locked On Big 12, Locked On Canes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, FanDuel is the place that I go first of the month, and I'm thinking, I'm kind of strapped on cash. I want a good payday. Well, I can get one from my job, and I can also say, look at this that I have from my job. And Cole Reagans, who's a pitcher, plays for an MLB team, and I don't even know which MLB team it is, but I can see that he has 9 strikeouts per game, and they have him at 6.5 over/under. And I say, well, I want to give him the over on strikeouts, and then he throws 7 strikeouts, and the $150 that I put on it, I win back. Thanks to FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 on bet spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count in the NBA or the NHL, or bet on regular season MLB baseball. That's what I do when I'm bored and want to watch a good game and have Cole Reagans, whoever that is, on the over and strikeouts, give me some money in my pocket. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Go to FanDuel.com/locked on and do it today. Alex Dono of Locked On Canes. The idea of Miami being in the Big 12 is not sexy. It's not flashy. The Big 10 of the SEC certainly are. What is the perception from Canes fans of that program being a Big 12 school?
Moaning and groaning. The perception is that going from the ACC in its current form to the Big 12 in its current form, obviously it'd look a little bit different if multiple teams enter, that it's basically just the ACC with a different logo and a few more travel miles to play some of the schools that are in the Big 12 now. So I don't think any Miami fan would say that would be fantastic. Well, let's get out of this ACC. Let's go lock, stock, and barrel into the Big 12. No disrespect to anyone who watches Locked On Big 12, but I don't think that Miami fans.
I think you're kind of saying lateral move here, right? I don't think there's any disrespect here. It's just it's a lateral move. It is.
Yeah, like I wouldn't say it's a step down, but it's a lateral move. So it's like, I think any time when Miami fans imagine what a conference realignment, what that would look like for Miami, and you're fantasizing about that, you're thinking about, wouldn't it be really cool to play, USC sometimes, to play Ohio State, Michigan on a semi-regular basis, to play, Alabama, to play Florida again as a regular part of the schedule, whether you're dreaming about the Big 10 or the SEC. I don't think anyone's going to bed at night and dreaming about being in the Big 12 and, hey, we could play UCF on a regular basis.
That is, I think the concept of the UCF Miami regular season conference game is one that really hinders fans. It's tough to get behind. I understand it coming from Texas schools that feel the same way about who they consider to be little brothers and irrelevance. So when it comes to the idea of then the Big 12 as a lifeboat, like I take a Utah, for example, they wanted to stay in the Pac-12. They were forced into the Big 12 because the Big 10 and the SEC ended up balking. And because of that, it almost feels like you're on the lifeboat, but you were the captain of the ship and you really didn't mind all that much going down with it. For Miami, do you fight tooth and nail to keep the ACC alive? Or if the Big 12 is there as a lifeboat, is there an opportunity that you take?
I get the sense that, and this is not a popular opinion among Miami fans, but all I can base this on is what the athletic director at Miami, Dan Radakovich, what he has said publicly, because we don't hear. I'm not in there. I'm not a fly on the wall. I don't know what's being said behind closed doors. They seem to really want to, at least this is what they're saying, they want to fight to keep the ACC alive. I feel, Radakovich, Miami's AD, as of about 2 months ago, probably, I think it was in the early days of spring football, I'm going to say probably early March, was on a popular sports radio show in the area. And, he said all the right things about the ACC. No, we're not going to sue them like Florida State and Clemson are doing. We want to keep this conference together. We appreciate the fact that, it's a conference that is involved in the college football playoff with the guaranteed bid for the champion and all that. So publicly, they seem to be in full support of the ACC. But again, sometimes you say things when you don't necessarily mean them, because at the same time, not that Miami has lived up to their end of the bargain, because yes, when the ACC added Miami back in 2004 was the first season in the league, everyone thought, well, it's Miami and Florida State are going to be playing for an ACC championship every single year. Miami has not lived up to their end of the bargain whatsoever. I also don't feel like the ACC has lived up to their end of the bargain for any of their members. I mean, their reigning conference champion is currently suing them. They've fallen behind when it comes to the revenue gap. The officiating in the ACC is consistently terrible, which I know is something that a lot of schools have a problem with, why they can't raise a better standard there. So, yeah, listen, when you bring up the lifeboat scenario, it changes the conversation, Drake, because at the end of the day, if the ACC were to either collapse, right, which not likely anytime soon, but it's possible, or if Florida State and Clemson and let's say a few others like North Carolina, Virginia, are teams that are talked about as potentially wanting to get out, if these teams were to find a way out, if these schools find a way out, it does definitely weaken the current conference, because you take Florida State and Clemson out of the ACC, doesn't really feel like a power conference anymore. So even if Miami may be giving off the impression publicly right now that they're happy in the conference and they want to fight to keep the conference around, the second you take Florida State and Clemson out of it, I see it as a much less valuable conference. And, the idea of, in that case, if the ACC either implodes and you need a lifeboat, or if the ACC is just not what it used to be, then, yeah, at least you could be in a situation, if you do have a soft landing spot in the Big 12, at least then you don't have to worry about some of the things that you worry about right now. Is the ACC going to get completely left out of potential collective bargaining talks? Or are they no longer going to be considered a power conference? Because, yeah, the Big 12 won't be what the SEC and the Big 10 are right now, but at least that would still be a power conference when in this scenario, the ACC wouldn't be. So, yes, that would provide a nice security blanket for Miami if it came to that.
Look, no two ways around it. Miami's a profitable athletic department. That's why I think the Big 12 is so high on Miami. And the Big 10, it seems, wants to grab the Clemson, Florida State. That's priority. The SEC has been, to this point, pretty strict on keeping things where they are because of how profitable they are. And Dono, if the ACC loses its top two members, it looks like it will, the revenue just won't make a lot of sense anymore for a school that deserves more money like Miami. Is that a worry that when those two powers are gone, the Canes aren't getting what they deserve?
Yeah, it's definitely a worry. Some people take the other side of the coin, which I don't necessarily agree with this, but I think it's an important thing to bring up. Okay, that there can be some competitive value when it comes to a path into a 12, which is soon going to be a 14-team playoff. Mm-hmm. It's going to expand even further in a couple of years, and this is assuming the ACC were to keep the automatic conference champion bid, which they currently have, and, you know, the opportunity at large spots, right? That you still have a path to the playoff that, hey, maybe if you have a little bit easier of a schedule and you're not having to play every single week, you're going from LSU to Ole Miss to Georgia to Bama, et cetera, and all the heavy hitters in the Big Ten, that honestly, maybe you have a more clear path to the playoff being a big fish in the small pond. I do know some people who take that viewpoint. I think that viewpoint, though, Drake, can be a slippery slope, because if you're playing in a conference that's far less competitive, yes, in theory, you have an opportunity to have an easier path to the playoff every year, but then that would also assume you're still able to recruit competitively if you're in a diminished conference, which is not always a guarantee, and that, you know, you're not hurt when NIL transfer portal, that you're not being hurt too much and being in a conference that makes less revenue, that you have to make up that revenue somewhere else. Are there wealthy donors behind the scenes that are going to say, hey, if our revenue gap is we're making net 30, 40 million less than everyone else, do we have someone who's going to step up and out of the goodness of their heart, they're going to donate 40 million to bridge that gap? Maybe, maybe not, probably not. But those are things to think about. Like, are you able to still recruit a team that's capable of competing with Power 2 teams, even if you're not part of that? I can't answer that question, but it's a question that, you know, it's hard to guarantee a yes on that.
Dono, getting into if the big if of Miami is a Big 12 school moving forward, how we could bridge the gap and make this thing work, because it seems as though at least one entity really would like to make it happen here on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, alongside Locked On Canes, your team every day. Look, no shock. I've been called competitive multiple times. And what do I respond with when I get called competitive? It's that the answer is yes, I am competitive. And I can flex that competitive nature at Monopoly Go. It is exciting every day to open an app where I can beat my friends. I know that might sound weird to you, but again, I'm competitive. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzy. So Monopoly Go is like the old-fashioned Monopoly you used to play and you loved it, but now it's on your mobile device and there are even more crazy options and crazy boards. You can even rob your friends' vaults, play against them, play with them. Monopoly Go gives you all of those options with unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes or cool new playing pieces to travel across multiple boards with. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench, go download it now for free on Google Play and the App Store. It is Monopoly Go. Game on. Dono, looking at where Miami is from a revenue standpoint, again, it's one of the more valuable schools in the country, usually top 25, whether football is good or bad. And that power, that entity, if the Big Ten and the SEC do end up balking, the Big 12 is right there to pick it up and try to create that Power 3 conference. Again, we've established with Florida State and Clemson gone, when revenue doesn't make sense in the ACC anymore, I think Miami's valuable enough. They'll look for a new home elsewhere where they can get more money. The Big 12 will be that when those top two teams, the ACC, do finally depart. With that being said, all of the moaning and groaning aside, when you picture Miami as a Big 12 school, is there a path forward where that works?
I think there is a path forward, and I'll say it because being part of the SEC or the Big Ten doesn't automatically guarantee you success. Now, obviously, the revenue cut, at least in there. Now, remember, when they bring in more members, the revenue cut gets a little bit smaller until they renegotiate their TV deals. But even with a higher revenue cut, leaving the ACC for the Big Ten, and I can use a specific example on this, doesn't automatically elevate your athletic program. Like a few years ago, Maryland left the ACC for the Big Ten, and I don't feel like Maryland has really boosted their brand much more from one conference to the other. Like, it doesn't guarantee you any success being part of that. I think being embraced and being celebrated by your new conference is important. And I'm not saying that the SEC or Big Ten wouldn't do that for Miami, but if the Big Ten rolls out the red carpet and if they promote Miami in a proper way, I think Miami could find some success and actually have a good experience with that. And then, when you talk about why a school like Miami would be attractive for the Big 12, potentially, something that I know this does get talked about a lot, even when Miami's like in-game attendance may be inconsistent at times. Like when they're hot, the attendance is hot, the ticket prices are high. When they're not, it's the opposite. They always perform well on television, and it's a big media market. So there's not that many of those in college football. I mean, you have, Georgia Tech obviously has not been a very successful program for most of the recent years, but being in the Atlanta market is successful. One of the things that made UCLA and USC so attractive for the Big Ten was the Los Angeles market. There's not, major football in the New York City market, but that's a huge market. Miami is, I think, a top 12 market, and there's not that many of those big media markets, a lot of college towns around college football. So I think that's something that could make Miami attractive for the Big 12 as well.
It does seem like the Big Ten's focus is adding Clemson and Florida State. At least those have been the conversations that have been like what we've heard. And the SEC, it seems content. Greg Sankey looks he's much more of a visionary than I think most people take him for, as he looks toward how to create, and you've seen conversations leaked recently, how to create this almost power two scenario of a college football playoff only featuring the SEC and the Big Ten. With that, as Miami's not the focus, the Big 12 has them at the top of the wish list. Brett Yormark has them at the top of the wish list. Dono, I want to get kind of the pulse almost socially, right? To have a UCF there, to be playing a conference game against Utah or Colorado, a Texas Tech, a TCU, a West Virginia. It's not sexy when you say it out loud, but it's a very blue-collar conference that has one thing going for it right now, and it's stability, more so than most stability. Does that entice Miami on the whole?
There's a few matchups that you bring up that I think should entice Miami fans. I mean, people who really love football and know football, I think would appreciate matchups against Utah. I mean, it's just been such a consistent, well-coached program in recent years. Like the Utes have been a tough out for anybody, right? Definitely. I know that people who root for Miami, Florida State, and Florida, they talk down UCF a little bit when they made their championship rings after a non-championship. They've been a meme for a long time, but that's a program that's been on the rise for a long time. And there's also, at least in the short term, there's a lot of Miami tie-ins. A lot of players who have left Miami in the transfer portal have found homes at UCF. Just in this transfer cycle alone, former Miami defensive end Nigel Kelly transferred there. Former Miami backup quarterback Jakari Brown is now there. Former Miami signee Antoine Jackson is there. So there's a lot of, I don't know how long those guys are going to be there the next couple of years, but there are some tie-ins. There's a lot of connections there between those two programs. Now, a sexy matchup just based on who's the coach there right now, Deion Sanders. Yeah, it'd be a lot of fun playing Colorado for as long as Coach Prime stays there. And, you mentioned West Virginia, the old school Miami fans, of course, you go back to the Big East rivalry between Miami and WVU would appreciate that as well. So, again, it's not the type of matchups you would get in the SEC or the Big Ten, but I think there are some fun matchups to be had in the Big 12 and some old rivalries that can be renewed, and maybe you create more of a rivalry with a school like UCF.
I think it's a tough conversation. I know it is, because I've been in position before when I was in college, the team that I root for, when you just don't know the future of your conference and where things are going to go. And I'm sure there are Miami fans that see, again, Miami and the Big 12 in the same sentence and think that there's no way it's impossible. But when you got guys like Dennis Dodd releasing articles that say there's a kind of a break the glass scenario where Clemson and Florida State end up in the Big 12 and a Power 3 is truly solidified. When stuff like that's on the table, I think Miami to the Big 12 is certainly on the table. And that's kind of the thesis that I end on is in realignment, whatever you think is going to happen usually doesn't happen, it seems. It's only what ESPN, Fox, the TV companies want to dole out and move their properties around for. Dono, what's the thesis to you when you think Miami in expansion moving forward?
I think ending the uncertainty is one of the most important things. Wherever you end up, obviously, again, the dream scenario would be to end up in the Power 2. But if it is a conference like the Big 12, and if Miami and other teams do wind up in the Big 12, it would be stronger than it currently is today. So that could be something to celebrate to a lesser extent. But ending the uncertain, like having to, for the fans who are deep into the weeds, who follow all this realignment, these hypotheticals every single day, to get out of that uncertainty. Whereas, okay, is my conference going to look this way in 2 months, 2 years? Is there still going to be a conference 2 years from now? To take that uncertainty away, I think would be a big thing. So I think the thesis there would be wherever Miami ends up, you make it your home and you go all in and you run with it. And, you keep investing what the administration is now investing in the program. They've really stepped it up over the past few years. Obviously people take their pot shots at Mario Cristobal and his in-game management, but the off-the-field stuff, recruiting, program building, he's doing work down in this area that I haven't seen done in a couple of decades, to be honest with you, the way that the recruiting is going down here. So if you can find stability somewhere, even if that's in the Big 12, you take it, you run with it, you try to keep rising this program up.
I wholeheartedly believe that Miami is an entity that is very valuable in college sports, and they will end up in a spot where they can benefit a conference. The reason I know that's the case is because ESPN is going to make sure that it happens. It's the TV networks that get these. Again, I call them properties because that's what they're treated as when you move them around across the landscape of college athletics. That is Alex Dono of Locked On Canes, Drake Toll with you from Locked On Big 12. Come back to our shows tomorrow to give you more on the transfer portal, NIL, expansion. There's a ton going on. No such thing as an offseason in college football or college basketball right now. Thanks for making our shows your first listen every single day right here on Locked On Canes and Locked On. Thanks for making them again your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.